The wind that day carried the scent of rain long before the clouds showed themselves. Cole Hartwell rode with his head bent slightly forward beneath the brim of his hat, his coat collar turned up against the restless air. The prairie stretched in all directions, vast and gold-brown under the pale sky, and his mare's hooves struck a steady rhythm on the packed earth of the trail. The saddle creaked softly with each rise and fall of her gait. Somewhere out there, if the sheriff's word could be trusted, was a woman who had taken what wasn't hers. She was said to be Apache. Said to be dangerous. Said to have been seen near the stolen cattle. Cole had heard those kinds of said-to-be stories before, and he'd learned they often meant something other than the truth. But the sheriff's request had been direct, the weight in his tone making it clear this was not a favor that could be easily declined. And Cole had learned another thing in his 33 years. Out here, refusing the wrong man could ruin you quicker than a bad harvest. The trail curved toward a rocky bluff where the grass thinned and turned the color of old parchment. There, standing in the open as though she'd been expecting him, was Nita Lonebird. The name had been spoken with disdain in town, but in the open air it felt strange in his mind, quiet and clean like water slipping over stone. She stood with her hands bound in front of her, wrists raw from the rope. Her chin was high, her hair loose and stirring in the wind. She was younger than he had expected, 29 if what he'd been told was right, but there was nothing unfinished about her. Her presence felt carved from something older. He dismounted, dust whispering up around his boots. The distance between them closed quickly, though it felt longer than it was. She didn't step back, didn't avert her gaze. The rope between her hands was drawn taut, the fibers biting against her skin. Cole took his hunting knife from his belt. The sun found the blade for just a moment, sending a brief, sharp glint across the space between them. It would have been the simplest thing in the world to lead her into town bound as she was. Or to cut the rope and walk beside her anyway. Or, though he told himself he would not, to finish it here. But his hands stalled and he found himself studying her face instead. It wasn't fear that lived there. Not quite defiance either. She was watching him as if she were waiting for him to remember something he'd forgotten a long time ago. Then a tear slid from the corner of her right eye. Just one. It tracked slowly through the dust on her cheek, leaving a faint glistening trail. It was not the tear of someone desperate to survive. It was heavier, a stone dropped in deep water. The knife felt suddenly wrong in his hand, cold, weightless, unsteady. Without meaning to, he loosened his grip on the rope. The movement was small, but her chin lifted the smallest degree, and it was enough to feel as though the air itself had shifted. "Walk," he said. The word came low and rough, as if spoken by the wind itself. They started toward the narrow trail, her steps sure and even on the uneven ground. He stayed half a pace behind, the rope slack now, his hand no longer tight on it. The sky had darkened toward the west, clouds swelling with the color of forged iron. The wind's edge grew cooler. A mile passed in silence. Then she caught her toe on a loose stone and stumbled. He reached out instinctively, steadying her by the elbow. Her skin was warm and the contact, brief as it was, felt strange in its quiet grounding. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. After that, her pace matched his exactly, as if the act of catching her had set some small, silent agreement between them. When the first drops of rain came, they were wide and cold, falling with soft splats against dust that hissed as it darkened. He spotted a shape ahead, an old line shack leaning slightly to one side, its boards silvered with age. He guided her toward it, opening the door and ushering her inside before the rain turned heavy. The air in the shack was stale with the ghost of old fires, cedar, and the faint musk of dry rot. A single cot sagged in one corner and a warped chair leaned against the wall. A tin lantern sat on a crooked shelf. Cole lit it, its glow catching the sharp planes of her face, her hair now darkened and clinging from the rain. She stood near the far wall, her bound hands resting lightly against her stomach. He reached into his coat, pulled out a strip of jerky and set it on the small table between them. After a pause, she took it and ate in slow, steady bites, her gaze never leaving his. Thunder rolled outside, a long, low sound that rattled the boards. She spoke then, her voice quiet but steady. "Why didn't you kill me?" His eyes went to the knife resting on the table. Its edge was dull in the lantern light, the steel turned flat and unthreatening. He didn't answer. Part of him didn't know. The other part understood too well but couldn't put it into words without unraveling something inside himself. The rain went on, drumming its own patient rhythm overhead. He realized he was in no hurry for it to stop. By the time they stepped outside again, the air smelled of wet sage and earth newly turned. The clouds were breaking apart to the east, sunlight slicing through in quiet gold. They walked on, and the town began to appear in the distance, not a welcome sight but a looming one. The people there noticed them at once. They always did. Whispering from boardwalks, they turned to watch as Cole led Nita to the sheriff's porch. Sheriff Harlan was a broad man with eyes like dull nails. "That her?" Harlan asked. Cole felt Nita's stillness beside him. She didn't lower her head. "She's to be questioned about the cattle theft," Harlan said. "We'll sort it." Cole's jaw tightened. He knew there was no proof, just talk and suspicion thick enough to choke on. "I'll vouch for her until you find something real," he said. The crowd shifted. Murmurs rose. Harlan's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside. "Your choice, Hartwell. Don't make me regret letting it be yours." That night, Nita slept in the small bunkhouse on his ranch. Days passed. She worked without complaint, mending a torn saddle strap, carrying buckets from the well, grinding coffee in the mornings. He began to notice the way she paused at the horizon each dusk, her eyes following something unseen. One morning he left an apple on the porch rail for her. By the next day it was gone, and in its place sat a single wildflower, its petals still cool with dew. Neither mentioned it, but the exchange left a quiet warmth in him that lasted well past sundown. Then one evening Sheriff Harlan returned with 2 deputies. They claimed they'd found a leather pouch near the stolen cattle, a pouch they said belonged to Nita. Cole knew it was planted. Standing on the porch beside her, he felt the memory of that first moment on the bluff return. The same sense of a blade at her throat, only now it was the town holding it. "She's staying," Cole said, stepping forward. "You'll have to come through me." The standoff lasted longer than it should have, the air sharp as glass between them. Finally Harlan spat into the dust and turned his horse. Not worth the trouble. They rode away, leaving only the sound of wind through dry grass. When Cole looked down, his hand was still wrapped around hers. Weeks later they married under the cottonwood tree behind his house. No preacher, no crowd. Just 2 people and the wind, carrying the scent of sage. Her dress was simple, his shirt freshly laundered. They stood close, hands linked, and in the space between breaths, the world felt steadier than it had in years. In the evenings they sat together on the porch, watching the prairie turn from gold to deep blue as stars began to prick through. Sometimes they spoke. More often they didn't. Words were not the measure of what they had built. And I tell you this because I saw it, how a single tear can turn a weapon into an open hand. How the fiercest battles are not fought against enemies, but against the walls we build to keep others out. Love does not arrive like a lightning strike, it grows like grass after the rain, quietly, stubbornly, and with a beauty that belongs to no one but the 2 who tend it.